I've been speaking a fair bit recently about crime in this country, and I maintain everything I've said. I am a hardliner on crime. I think that um, violent offences, particularly, must result in justice. There's a particularly troubling case from Huddersfield, and I'm going to read it out. It's a piece in the Daily Mail regarding the sentencing, which has happened. I think it's a just sentence now. In previous videos, I've condemned what I see as overtly lenient sentences. In this case, I think the sentence is about right. But there is inconsistency in our justice system. Whilst I welcome this verdict, I still think it's nonsensical that you have a situation where an innocent person is killed and the perpetrator gets a hefty sentence. Then you get another situation where an innocent person is killed. I'm referring to the elderly gentleman in London killed by the teenage girls. And yet those perpetrators get a tap on the wrist, metaphorically speaking. They are a bit younger, but not much younger. A few years. Their sentence was 2.5 years, 3.5 years, and 4 years. In this case, the killer got 23 years minimum, which is, by British standards, a pretty long sentence. I'll go read out a bit of the article. I've been talking a lot today, so I might not read it all out, but I will put a link to the article. But there's a few things I want to say around this. I want to focus on, I could talk about sentencing and all that. I've covered that in other videos. I want to talk about a very specific thing, which is aggro and young men. You know, I guess it would be about a year ago now, I was in Sunderland city centre and there was a group of teenage boys, I guess. There must have been between 12 and 15 of them. It was a big group. And they threw something in the direction of me and my friends. And it was my friend who is gay and the lesbian couple that we know. And so I was the one kind of straight guy there. But they threw an egg at us. And they didn't say anything and it didn't land. But clearly it wasn't accidental. And I looked at them and thought, what the hell? But I really, really had to keep my cool because you read so many stories of teenage thugs laying into people who stand up to them. And I just didn't want to be another statistic. I had to really bite my tongue and keep my cool, and I just couldn't say anything. If it was one or two of them, I definitely would have said something. But a gang of teenage boys, I'm not going to, that's risky. But that is actually a point I'd like to reiterate. People have this extremely naive idea that teenagers are harmless or they're just teenagers. You know, adrenaline-fueled teenage boys are potentially very dangerous. Far more dangerous than most adults, actually. I would honestly sooner take my chance around some 6-foot, bald-headed doormen than I would around a gang of cocky teenage boys. That's a very, stereotypical thing I've just said, but it's to reiterate the point that this naive idea, they're just teenagers, it's so naive. I'm just going to read out a bit of this article. But before I get into that, what I find troubling is people are actually victim blaming here because the victim was a refugee. And I find that abhorrent. I think it is part of the side effect of this dehumanization we get with migrants and refugees coming from the right. When that is on a constant basis, instead of recognizing this for what it is, an unprovoked attack, certainly not one that warranted a fatal stabbing, instead of seeing it for what it is, people are actually trying to blame the victim and saying he somehow provoked it. I find that disgusting. I've seen the footage, and what you see is Huddersfield Town Centre. I was there years ago, so I have a kind of rough idea of what it's like. And the perpetrator and his girlfriend are at a kind of stall, and the victim walks past, and it's not very clear, but he apparently brushed past the girl. The perpetrator took exception to that. Maybe he was under the impression that the victim was doing something, but the victim was walking away, and then there's some verbals between them and the victim comes back. You can argue he shouldn't have done that, but he was not armed. What we then know is that he was stabbed in the throat. and sadly died. Now, my argument would be for those trying to make excuses for this, and I'll get into the details in a second. Even if, even if the victim had done something, i.e., was being a little bit aggro or really did a bit more than brush past the girl, even if that's the case, normal people do not go around carrying knives. They just don't. If you're carrying a knife, you intend to use it. And every single time it's the same excuse. We do it for self-protection. But every teenage killer who does that, actually this guy's 20 now, so he's not technically a teenager anymore, which may explain the long sentence. But it's deeply troubling. Anyway, I'm just going to read out a bit of the details here. But I've looked at the footage and I see absolutely nothing to suggest that the victim was posing a serious threat, even if it was aggro. A cocky, drug-fueled thug who stabbed a teenage Syrian refugee in the neck after he brushed past his girlfriend on a busy shopping street was today detained for life with a minimum term of 23 years. Ahmed al-Ibrahim, 16, who fled war-torn Homs after being injured in a bombing, had been living in Huddersfield for only a couple of weeks when he was stabbed to death by Alfie Franco, 20, in a West Yorkshire town centre. Leeds Crown Court heard that on April the 3rd, Ahmed was walking around the town with a friend and Franco was going to buy eyelash glue with his girlfriend after a job centre appointment. When the two pairs crossed paths, Franco took some petty exception to Ahmed innocuously walking past his girlfriend, jurors were told. CCTV footage shows Franco saying something to Ahmed and calling him over after a short verbal altercation. As Ahmed walked over, Franco opened the blade on a flick knife he was carrying in his trousers and drove it into the boy's neck. Prosecutors said Franco kept the knife hidden in a sly way until the last second so that Ahmed, who was unarmed, didn't have a chance. Footage played during the trial showed Ahmed clutching his throat and staggering a few yards up the street before collapsing. People have been trying to claim, oh, he was fine, he walked away. Initially, yes, he does walk away, but he obviously fell after that. I mean, he's dead, so there's no question about that's what happened. Jurors heard the knife travelled about 6 centimetres deep into Ahmed's neck, causing immediate and massive blood loss and causing him to choke to death. Franco fled the scene but later handed himself in at a police station, telling officers in an interview he had been acting in self-defence and had spent years living in South Africa as the only white boy in the Cape Flats, where if a boy came for you with aggression, they were either coming to hurt you or kill you. Franco, who returned to Huddersfield from South Africa at the age of 13, told the trial he thought he had seen Ahmed reaching for a weapon in his waistband. He said he had been aiming for the boy's cheek and just wanted to cut him and get away. Well, why would you aim for someone's cheek if you're just trying to warn them you'd cut them on the arm or something, if that was really the case? Franco told jurors he had a knife with him that day because he had been in altercations and heard things that happened in Huddersfield Town Centre and wanted it to keep him safe. But in his closing speech to jurors, prosecutor Richard Wright, KC, said to plunge that knife into someone's neck had done no more than walk towards you after you've engaged them in some verbal argy-bargy in the street. That's not reasonable self-defence. Mr. Wright said Franco was cool as a cucumber when he delivered the fatal blow, even continuing to eat his ice cream during the verbal altercation. That is not signs of someone who's scared for their personal safety. The prosecutor said this is a case of a young man with a cocky swagger wandering around town with his girlfriend on drugs who doesn't like the fact that Ahmed has spoken back to him. Sentencing him to life with a minimum term of 23 years today, Judge Howard Crossan said Franco's claims of being in fear of Ahmed were incredible, as the CCTV footage showed this defendant calmly eating ice cream while preparing to stab him. Again, that's just common sense. Someone who's in fear doesn't act like that. He told Franco during this trial you tried to portray Ahmed as aggressive and threatening. The CCTV reveals you were under no threat whatsoever. Ahmed was unarmed as he walked peacefully around Huddersfield Town Centre that day. I'm just going to see, I'll just read the end, it's not too long, so I'll just read the rest. He said Franco's claim to have seen a weapon on Ahmed's waistband was a lie. The judge said before Ahmed made any movement towards you, you prepared your knife for use. You calmly and surreptitiously removed the knife from your waistband, opened it and concealed it in your pocket. He said he was satisfied that Franco intended to kill Ahmed and they had lured the boy to within striking distance before lunging at him with the knife, deliberately aiming for his neck. Jurors heard Franco had a wider interest in knives, there you go, and a message a friend the day before threatening to stab someone over a stolen push bike. He consumed cannabis before the killing, and tests also revealed he had recently used cocaine, diazepam, ketamine and codeine. The court heard Ahmed had arrived in the UK and as an unaccompanied child refugee and was originally housed in another part of the country before being moved to Huddersfield to be near his uncle. After his death, his family said he dreamed of becoming a doctor, wanting to heal others after all he had endured. They said he chose to come to the UK because he believed in the values of human rights, safety and dignity. He had just begun settling into his new life with his uncle, adjusting to a new language, a new home and a future he was excited to build. Ahmed was kind, gentle and carried so much promise. Losing him has left an unimaginable emptiness in our hearts. We never thought the place he saw as a safe haven would be where his life would end. Yesterday, Franco was found guilty of murder by a jury after just 3 hours of deliberations. He admitted a charge of possessing a knife in a public place at an earlier hearing. In a victim impact statement read in court, Ahmed's uncle Ghazwan Al Ibrahim said Ahmed was an intelligent and outstanding student whose dream was to become a doctor. He said his nephew had a sociable and ambitious personality, loved helping people and was passionate about life. Mr. Al Ibrahim said Ahmed spent 3 months travelling to the UK and initially lived in the Home Office Hotel in Swansea with other people his own age before being moved to Huddersfield to be near his uncle. He said Ahmed's death had disappointed all of his hopes of a better life in the UK and wasted all his family's efforts to get him there. Mr. Al Ibrahim said it was the end of everything we had hoped for Ahmed after we're being happy about his arrival in the UK, the land of peace and the fulfilment of dreams. I'll put a link to that article. So the commentary I've been seeing in this on social media has ranged between those being horrified by the murder and condemning the killer and welcoming the sentence, to those who condemn it but then try to get into whataboutery like, maybe the other lad provoked it or something like that, to some outright dehumanizing comments, disgusting comments that honestly made me sick. For example, one guy said that there's many rapes prevented. This is a direct result of the dehumanizing of migrants, which I've spoken about before, and it's one thing I've spoke about in my discomfort of this country moving to the right in that sense, the dehumanizing of migrants. By the way, the report there was by Mark Dewell, Duell, a senior reporter at the Daily Mail. I just don't think that normal people go around carrying knives. I've seen the footage, and right enough, the killer just kind of wanders off. This is not someone who was in fear. I've been in that situation. I've been in a situation where teenage boys have been aggro, and I've been tense, naturally. The killer in this case did not look tense. Now, maybe he was showing off to his girlfriend. But you do not carry a knife unless you intend to use it. And the problem here, by the way, the victim was unarmed. That has to be clarified. What we have in this case is a 16-year-old boy who's lost his life, having already been through a war zone. And we have a young man who's going to spend the rest of his life in prison, or a very big part of it. So 2 lives destroyed from aggro, from whether it's drugs or it's other factors. But I think this thing about aggro and teenage boys really needs to be addressed. I do think that, particularly in big cities like London and Birmingham, I maintain, and I don't care if this is politically incorrect, there is a very, very toxic subculture, exemplified by drill music, which glamorizes gang lifestyles to young men. That's the reality. Where they will call each other out in videos, literally, which then fuels turf wars. And you'll get apologists saying, oh, it's just art, it's just expression. My response to that is, you're either lying or you are naive. Which is it? Drill videos have directly fueled gang violence. Now, I'm not saying that's the only factor. There's a lot of components involved. It's horrifying, really is, that young men just lash out without thinking of the consequences. And it's always knives, If there was no knives involved, you might have a broken nose, you might have a fight, and you might even have death if it was a situation where, one person was outnumbered. I mean, this case is distressing, but I've heard other cases where an entire pack of teenage boys have chased down another and then killed them. In fact, that happened um, in Houghton the Spring a couple of years ago, not far from Sunderland. There is a really dangerous mindset with young men, and I think education is a big part of it. You know, I was remonstrating with some of the people watching my channel, whether they're subscribers or not, I don't know. But they mentioned education. If they're watching this right now, I agree with them on that. Education is important. Where I disagree is on sentencing. I think where a heinous crime is being committed, there has to be a tough sentence for the sake of the family. I think in this case, 23 years is probably about right. It's not a tap on the wrist. That's a pretty tough sentence by UK standards. It's probably only because he's 20. If he was 15 or 16, it would be a much shorter sentence. But we also need to look at why is it some cases are dealt with as murder and others as manslaughter. I believe that the teenage girls who attacked the elderly man in London should have been charged with murder because their victim was vulnerable. They weren't doing that for giggles. They were doing it to hurt the man. I think they should have been charged with murder. There's too many cases that are processed as manslaughter when really they should be murder. This case was murder, hence probably the tougher penalty. But I want to talk about those two things, young men in aggro and the dehumanizing of migrants, because if if the victim was white, there would definitely be a different attitude. People are saying if this was the other way around, the sentence would be different. That may or may not be true, but I would also argue the attitude of the victim would be different. Now, there has been examples of white victims of racist hate crimes. In this case, that wasn't cited as a factor. It was to do with the killer obviously feeling that his girlfriend had been, brushed aside or something. The thing is, he never even cited that in his defence. He didn't say, I was protecting my girlfriend. He said he thought that the victim had a knife, and that was false. He didn't. He was unarmed. And based on what his family has said about him, that doesn't sound like someone who's involved in gangs, or I just think that the way people are smearing the victim here is appalling. Even if there's a bit more to it and the victim had, maybe been a little bit, had said something, or I still maintain normal people just don't go around carrying knives. That's someone who is a danger to the public. The killer, I mean. So how do we address this problem? Knife amnesties can work sometimes, but they're not a be-all and end-all. It's easy to ban guns. It's harder to ban knives because obviously knives are used for everyday purposes. Shops have an age limit on knives, but there's black markets, there's ways that young men get their hands on them. It would not be difficult to just go into his parents' kitchen and pick up a knife. But I really, really think that this lack of thoughtfulness, this idea that I'll stab someone and then not think of the consequences, not think that they're going to spend years in jail, ruin their own lives. If this had been a case, if there'd been a large group of young men and they went past and the killer then, they came up to the guy and then he stabbed him, I would think maybe the self-defense argument should be applicable, although still no normal person carries around a knife. But in this case, Ahmed and his friend, so two people and the killer, it just did not look to me, I've looked at that footage several times, it did not look to me like he was in any real danger. The victim then comes back to him, but it wasn't, we don't know, there's no sound in it. Was he looking for a fight, or was he simply responding to what the killer said? Someone calls your name, or someone, not your name, but someone calls you, you naturally look back. And maybe he was naive. Maybe he thought, okay, I'll just go closer to see what the guy said. I don't think he expected to be murdered. But I just find it disgusting that people are trying to smear the victim, and it gets into this dehumanizing of refugees. So all these unaccompanied young men coming here themselves, so they must all be rapists. That is what the far right are telling us, and it's dehumanizing, and it means that instead of looking at an innocent teenage boy who's been murdered, people that think, oh, the refugee must have done something. It really is quite sickening. But one thing with this case, at least the sentence warrants the gravity of the crime, so I welcome that. But it's still, there's nothing positive about this. A teenage boy has had his life taken away, and another young man has had his life taken away by his own actions. Um, it's just this thoughtlessness, this aggro, and with teenage boys, I'm going away from this case here. So much of it is that, oh, my buddy was in trouble, so I had his back. It's this group think. There needs to be a real tackling of that gang culture, this mentality of my mate was in trouble. So, for instance, particularly in the case where you get a group of teenage boys that say they start harassing someone, and then that person's brave enough to stand up to them and, shouts at them or something, and then the other boys will then lay into that person, oh, we're defending a friend. It's evil, it's disgusting, and it's terrifying, actually. Um, this is not to say that teenage girls are immune from it. Like I say, the group that killed the elderly man in London were teenage girls, but in most cases it is boys, and this is a really sinister thing. It needs to be tackled. Better role models. I mean, all these arguments are old. Better role models, father figures, all the rest of it. But um, it's just depressing. I think that we need to have strong male role models coming into schools and so on. It could be one thing. I'm not naive. It won't solve everything, but you need to look at what is attracting these young men to this lifestyle. So again, to my critics the other day, or to those who were taking a very left-wing view on crime, I don't disagree with you about the root causes. I don't disagree with you about education, about getting them away from a life of crime, all the rest of it. The only thing I strongly disagree with you on is on justice. I think that once a crime has been committed, there has to be justice. In this case, there has been justice, but we can't say that of every case. Anyway, I'll wrap it up here. I will put a link to the Daily Mail article. It's a tragic thing. A 16-year-old boy who could have ended up being a doctor saving lives has had his life extinguished by a moment's callousness, by a moment's brutality. Just like that. And his killer has ruined his own life by a thoughtless, brutal action. Without the knife being involved, there may have been fisticuffs, which would be bad enough, but it wouldn't have escalated to a fatality. Recently in Sunderland, I say recently, about a year ago, we had the knife angel that was moving around the country. It was a big sculpture made from confiscated knives from offenders, and it was a very harrowing thing. Visually impressive, but harrowing at the same time. This country does have a problem with knife crime. Although, having said all this, it has to be said that violent crime in Britain overall has actually reduced in recent years, recent decades. So we don't, hyperbole doesn't help anyone. The United Kingdom is still a lot safer than many parts of the world. But it's just so sad that this young guy was fleeing a war zone. He must have thought he would be safe in Britain. And then he's brutally murdered. I mean, it's also, we think of the young woman, Irina Zarutska, killed in Charlotte, North Carolina, again, fleeing a war zone. It's just so harrowing that people who are already feeling an awful situation. I mean, I saw one idiotic brainless comment, which was, oh, it's sad what happened, but doesn't he know he's not welcome here? Well, look, that sort of comment is disgusting. Why even bother saying it's sad what happened if you're going to go on to justify it effectively? So anyone wanting to defend this, look at the footage. Look at what happened. The victim walked past, so may well have been a misunderstanding. But normal people do not go around carrying knives. We're not talking here about someone who's just protecting his girlfriend. We're talking here about a thug who was carrying a knife and used it. So it's just it's a sad case all around, but it should be exemplify a couple of things. It should exemplify aggro and young men and why that issue needs to be tackled, and also the effects of dehumanizing migrants. Now, I'm not saying he killed the guy because he was a migrant, but I'm talking about the comments and the attitude to it. Like I say, a lot of decent people have condemned what happened, but there are some sick, sad little people out there who are actually trying to condone it. Abhorrent, appalling. It's absolutely sickening.